morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are on this beautiful planet. Welcome to my podcast, A Pan-African View. This is the first episode, and in it, I will be introducing myself and the podcast's philosophy. Just like everyone else, I dream a lot. I dream in my sleep and I dream while awake. I guess daydreaming might be interpreted as imagining things. I have imagined myself being many things: a great sportsman, a musician, a successful businessman, a great speaker, and even as a politician. My imagination, or should I say my ambition, must be awful, as I have not been able to be any one of these things. In the last couple of years, a persistent dream has been the creation of a personal podcast with two objectives. The first is simply to prove to myself and to other daydreamers that with some passion, some inspiration, and some push, perhaps from your family or friends, the dreams and thoughts can become a reality. The second objective is to share with whoever has similar concerns about the Pan-African vision and spirit as articulated by visionary leaders like Kwame Nkrumah, Mwalimu Julius Nyerere, Muammar Gaddafi, Thomas Sankara, Patrice Lumumba, and other great African leaders. Those who know me will certainly wonder what prompted me to start a podcast and why now. Not that I don't have much to say, far from it, but rather where the desire and especially the energy and drive came from. The answer is the coronavirus pandemic. As you all know, every country went through some form of lockdown. Mine was a total lockdown for 6 weeks. During the lockdown, internet became my best source of entertainment and new ideas. 2 days before I started drafting this introductory episode, my daughter Kamikaze sent me a documentary called Reconnect by Brian Rose, the founder of London Real. This video led me to other Brian podcasts, among them one entitled How to Find Your Podcast Idea. In another Brian video, and I quote, "If you are one of the people sitting around at home after being told to self-isolate due to the coronavirus outbreak, then I urge you to reframe this hardship into an opportunity and use the time productively." Suddenly, the dormant and nagging but persistent idea to start a podcast crystallized. Everything else, as they say, is history. Now that you know what triggered and inspired me to start my podcast, I believe your next question is what inspired the theme of my podcast, A Pan-African View. This is a wide subject, but I will briefly explain it. Most African countries gained their independence from the colonial masters about 60 years ago. During this time, Africa has been ruled by all sorts of characters: dictators, tyrants, autocrats, oppressors, authoritarians, etc. Today, several former French colonies have their central banks managed by France in Paris, although I'm told this is about to change. Through this arrangement, France has been looting billions of dollars that belong to Africa. In the 60s, African heads of state who tried to resist the continued French influence were removed either through staged coups or assassination. Today, we have leaders in their 70s, 80s, even 90s, who have been in power for over 30 years, have completely mismanaged their countries, and are not willing to vacate. Some have even tried to groom their sons to replace them. We have leaders who put personal interest before public interest, Public financial institutions are run as if they are personal property. Major national decisions and appointments are made at the dinner table in state houses instead of parliament. The list is endless. While Africa is endowed with huge natural resources that should make us rich, we are the poorest continent. For many years, our leaders have allowed Western countries, especially former colonial masters, to take out our resources for very little in return. Billions that should come to provide social services and improve our economies are banked into our leaders' private accounts abroad. Today, China is perhaps the biggest perpetrator in siphoning Africa's resources and, sadly, is done in complicity with corrupt African leaders. China is now buying land and other properties in Africa with immense appetite. This should not be allowed to continue. If the leaders we have had for the last 60 years had the right leadership values, Africa would be a respected continent with an equal voice with the rest of the world. It is very unlikely that the majority of the current crop of leaders will bring about the changes for the Africa we want. The Africa that gives hope to our children. The Africa that, instead of its youth dying in thousands in the Mediterranean as migrants seeking better lives in Europe, gives them reason to be optimistic of their future in Africa. The Africa that allows us to move freely from one country to another without need for visas. The Africa that allows us to trade with one another without unnecessary restrictions and barriers. Unfortunately, while the African Union has good intentions, its effectiveness in uniting Africa leaves a lot to be desired. The objective of this podcast is to create a platform for identifying and sharing African values, attitudes, and mindset that the next leaders should hold as they take on the various leadership positions, be they in politics, in business, or civil society. While the podcast targets the ages 25 to 40 years, the age I consider will be the leaders in the next 10 years, the content is still relevant for everyone. We are going to discuss and analyze political and social issues with a focus to engage and inspire the youth to love themselves, love their country, love Africa, and hopefully be motivated to play a leading role in turning Africa around and make it a better place for us and for the next generations. We look forward to partnering with other similar-minded people so that we can create a critical mass of highly motivated young people who are ready to participate in the national development agenda and influence decision-making in order to bring about the real Africa we want. Africa has all it needs to become a great continent. The challenge to achieving this greatness is one: an accountable and transparent leadership. Together, I have no doubt we can achieve it. We invite you to join us, and we look forward to your candid participation as we debate these very important issues. As we say in Swahili, asante na kwaheri. Your host, Gerald Mpisi.